Hey, we're going to do one last segment here. Just we talked a little bit about this the other day, but it's worth talking about right now. You brought up Zach Greinke and his Hall of Fame potential status. Scott Rolen is going to be joining Fred McGriff. I have no problem with either one of those two. None. I have stronger feelings about Fred McGriff, who I think absolutely belongs in. I have been convinced about Rolen. I understand the arguments for and against, but I see him and I go like, okay, great, yeah, good. I don't think this is an egregious entry. I think it's fine. I'm sure not everyone will agree with it, but again, it's one of those things that you see some of the names down on the ballot. Rodriguez and Ramirez had infinitely better careers, and when you know there are already PED users in the hall, it's like, okay, so I guess that's not the issue. Is it just we didn't like Manny and we didn't like A-Rod? Is that really what's going on here? Sheffield, the same thing. Sheffield had a remarkable career, was connected to Balco, but so was Pudge Rodriguez.
Yeah, I think if you're pro steroid users getting the Hall of Fame, I even think it's hard for you to justify someone like Manny Ramirez who failed it like 3 times.
Yeah,
if you failed it one time, okay, but if you keep failing the steroid test, I'm like, all right, it's probably a little bit harder to make the argument. But I do have a question for you, Sully.
Yeah.
Do you have any issue with the idea of Scott Rolen, the first year on the ballot, he only gets 10% of the vote. And then people make the argument, well, he only got 10% because the ballot was loaded. But now you look 5 years later, he's elected 76%, but the reason he gets in is because the ballot has dwindled with the amount of talent that's on the ballot this year. So should someone after 5 years be elected to the Hall of Fame when we only think he's a Hall of Famer when the ballot is looking weak? Because when we stack him up against other great MLB players, you're like, okay, this guy's not one of the 10 best players on this list right now, so he's not even going to get more than 10% of the vote. But 5 years later, when the ballot dwindles with quality talent, now we think he's good enough to make the Hall of Fame. I'd rather him just never make it if you think he's only good when there's lesser talent on the ballot.
I understand what you're saying, and I do think there's some validity to that. I think Scott was incredibly boosted by the fact that none of the first ballots, with the exception of Beltran, even made a dent, really.
No.
And he was aided by the fact that some of the players in the past, there's no more Clemens or Bonds discussions or anything like that. But I also think that there are some players who need a little bit of time to have their candidacy dissected and debated. Burt Blyleven is my favorite example of that, who got in the 13th or 14th ballot. And he didn't have the win total. He didn't have a lot of the totals that people normally looked at. He's top 5 all-time strikeouts. He's unbelievable stats he had up and down. He very rarely was considered one of the top 2 or 3 pitchers in the league. So there was this aura about him that he was a very good pitcher who had a very long career. But I think it took people a while to analyze his stats and sort of remove yourself from some of the more traditional stats to see his value. I think for some people, it took a few years of debating and analyzing his stats and everything like that to get him in a position where he is that his candidacy is clear to a lot of players. He also was lost in the shuffle because there was all the screaming about, should Clemens and Bonds be in? What the hell is Harold Baines doing in there? And all of that. So he kind of was like the middle child looking at mommy and daddy fighting, cowering in the back of the station wagon. I think that I get totally what you're saying, but I also think a candidate like Scott Rolen needs to have some reflection and some debate about him. My friend Richie Duncan, who has been a guest on the show before, has a very simple criteria for the Hall of Fame, which is this: are you famous? If so, yes.
Okay, that's kind of interesting.
And like I told him, and I said Scott Rolen. He said, I don't know who that is. Not famous. Doesn't get in. And I said, what about Jose Canseco? And he says he deserves an entire wing of the museum. So if he's famous, it's a Hall of Fame. Anyone famous in. If you're not famous, get out.
Well, the only issue is baseball players are getting less famous as the years go on. So eventually, we might not have any Hall of Famers.
Yeah, well, guess what? His sport is hockey. So guess,
I don't know anybody then. I work in hockey.
There you go. But I think more egregious than I mean, look at I've supported Rolen. I've not supported. I've gone back and forth on him. And as I said, he got in, and my initial reaction was, I didn't. When Jim Rice, one of my favorite players growing up, got in, I got choked up. I got a little teary-eyed when Jim Rice got in. There's a couple of people that made me go, wait, what? Who got in?
Isn't that kind of weird though? You got to debate and analyze the numbers for 5 years before deciding if someone's a Hall of Famer. I feel like doing a 10-year period is just way too long. I feel like it should be like 3 years, and then if after 3 years, like I don't think we should have a limit on the number of people we should vote on and how many people.
That I agree on. That I 100% agree on. I think that he was hurt by the ballot. I don't think there's 10 on the ballot is a completely arbitrary number. What if there's 13 qualifying players on the ballot, or what if there are none? I don't understand what 10 achieves.
Should it be pass fail? Either you're a Hall of Famer or not. I don't really understand.
Helton, who I think is a Hall of Famer, missing by 11 votes. What that means is, Helton family, make your reservations next year to go to upstate New York. I mean, there's no way someone's going to get to within 11 votes of the Hall of Fame and then not make it. He played in Coors Field.
That's the only thing. That's the only reason you don't think he's a Hall of Famer is if you think he's overinflated by Coors Field.
But I think that there have been players who played in Coors Field who didn't have his overall numbers. Now you can point out, okay, he didn't get to 400 home runs, he didn't get to 3,000 hits. He finished with a career OPS of 953.
Yeah, it's insane.
His numbers and his numbers aren't just. This is not Dante Bichette, okay? This is not someone who was okay on the road and a superstar at home. He is someone who's a consistent player wherever he played.
I got the splits if you want to hear them, Sully.
Sure, why not?
Yeah, because he's definitely better at home, but it wasn't like he was a scrub on the road. Because at home, 345 average, 1048 OPS. On the road, 287 average, 855 OPS. So if his road numbers were a full season numbers, he's still putting up all-star level numbers.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. 857 career OPS. You're going to be putting up some tremendous numbers, even if no matter what park you're playing in.
And that's for your careers. That means in his prime, he was probably putting up like a 925 OPS on the road or something.
Yeah. Yeah, because he had some down years. His final 2 years weren't that great. But again, my point is this. He is a player who has put up great numbers year in and year out. And the core, how many things are we supposed to put against someone? Oh, did they use roids? Oh, did they play in course? Oh, did they? And how about giving Todd Helton some credit that he played his entire career in Colorado? That when he had the chance that he didn't cash out and demand a trade or somewhere else like that. No, there's a guy from 1997 to 2013 was a Rocky. This is we should celebrate players like that.
Yeah, his numbers are absolutely insane. And when you look at his numbers are just insane. If you look at 2000, 2004, he puts up just immaculate numbers. But the player on the list that I kind of want to talk about, Sully, just because from a sad boy perspective, because he didn't get any votes, 0 votes. And I want to just talk about the trajectory of his career from how it started to how it finished. And that is actually someone from your favorite team, Sully, or I think at least your dad's favorite team, the San Francisco Giants, Matt Cain. Because when you think of Matt Cain, this was someone that was one of the best pitchers in baseball, had that perfect game, signed that massive contract. You look, he was a 2-time All-Star. He basically, for a 4-year period, looked like a Cy Young candidate, top 5 pitcher in baseball every single season. And then by the time of age 30, Matt Cain was basically done in Major League Baseball. And he was just because last year on the ballot, I believe Tim Lincecum was on it. And if you look at both of their careers side by side, both of them had massive peaks, both of them Cy Young candidates. Tim Lincecum won a couple Cy Youngs, both of them World Series champions, both of them signed massive contracts, and both of them were pretty much done by the time they turned the age of 30, which is just insane. And both of them had injuries to blame. So I just think when I look at the last 2 years of ballot, your father's favorite team, the Giants, Tim Lincecum and Matt Cain, when I think about how I thought about them when they were like 26, 27 years old and they felt like on top of the world, and you're like, this guy's going to be in my life for the next 10 years. Then the way both of their careers just kind of abruptly ended because of injuries, and the idea that neither one of them was good past the age of 30, I think it's just honestly shocking. And I just wanted to give some love to Matt Cain because he was really good and his career ended kind of sadly.
Yeah. Well, it's the danger. I mean, you see that. I mean, look at what Brandon Webb with the Diamondbacks won a Cy Young award, nearly won a second, and then he pitched one game. Bye.
Yeah, he's one of those greatest what if players that could have been, because he was right there, like taking the mantle, taking the torch after the Randy Johnson, Kurt Schilling era. And Brandon Webb was like a 2-time Cy Young Award winner, like right there in the mix for Cy Youngs. And it's crazy how his career ended as well.
Well, it's crazy how this ended. You and I wondered if we were going to have enough to do one show, and here we are.
Good for the rest of the week now.
Yeah, going over again. Miller, tell people where they can listen to your show.
Yeah, follow me on Twitter at CareerThomas24. Follow the show account on Twitter, Locked On Diamondbacks. We're on all your streaming platforms, of course, and we're also on YouTube, Locked On Diamondbacks on there as well.
And we're at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter and Instagram. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. Breaking down all sorts of goodness with Millard Thomas. And wait, I forgot to say one other thing. Holy cow. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. For your second listen, have that be Locked On MLB Prospects. Lindsey Crosby, he's a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. Check him out wherever you get your podcasts. Got that under the wire. Talking about all the goodness of the Hall of Fame and other things. This has been Locked On MLB. I'm your pal Sully. That's Millard Thomas. Let's fist bump for another week.